Okay, so welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I'm going to continue with my review, aka recaps, of the Netflix Haunting series. This season, it is the Haunting of Bly Manor. I did recap the Haunting of Hill House. If you have not seen those videos, I will link the playlist in the cards above and in the description box. So this season is, I believe, an episode shorter. The Haunting of Hill House was 10 episodes. This season it's 9 episodes, so I am going to jump right in, and if you are interested in hearing what I have to say, stay tuned. Okay, so this episode it progressed kind of slow for my taste. Like, I'm aware that a lot of shows do start off that way and they pick up as the season progresses, so that's what I'm hoping is going to happen. But for me, it did kind of start off quite slow, and even throughout the episode, you know, there were things here and there, but it wasn't. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a bad episode, but like I said, it did move. It moved kind of slow, especially considering, you know, comparing it to the first season. So okay. So what I didn't realize was that Carla Gugino, who played Olivia, the mom in the first season, she's actually back in this episode as the storyteller, and that's her title in this season. So it opens with her in a room. There's like this voiceover of a poem or a story or something going on, and so she eventually gets up and walks into the bathroom. The next time you see her, she's walking into a party. It's actually a wedding rehearsal dinner, and there's a guy standing up giving a speech, and she walks in, and you know, it was like this older guy she sat next to kind of looked at her kind of odd, and then the guy who's giving the speech, he turned and saw her, and all of a sudden his whole demeanor changed, and you know, she was kind of looking up at him, and then he turns back to the couple and starts talking about, you know, marriage and how important love is, and he's, you know, giving this whole speech, and you can see her facial expression change. So there's clearly something between them, or was something between them, and he's kind of bitter about it. I don't know, but you could tell, like, during his speech, her facial expression, she was looking kind of, it wasn't so much angry. She looked more hurt than angry, I would say. So after that, you know, they're all back in the house, and the wedding with the guests, they're sitting around and they're talking, and the bride is, you know, telling the group that she doesn't want to stay in that house, and he was saying, well, we can stay here for the wedding night before we leave for a honeymoon, and she's like, no, I've heard the horror stories about this house. I don't want to stay here. And you know, they kind of went back and forth a little bit with the group, and they're talking about the stories that they heard and how it used to be a convent back in the day. And next, you know, the storyteller, she comes over, and she basically tells them, you know, if you want to hear a story, you know, I know a good one. And then now she said, and she made a point to say, it's not my story that I'm telling, but if you want to hear a story. And so the guy who was giving the toast said, well, basically we have nothing else to do, and you know, we're all here, so, and he just seemed so bitter, and so she decided to go ahead on with the story. And so it opens up London 1987, and that's where you first see Dani. She's walking down the street. She saw this ad in the paper for a man looking for a nanny for his niece and nephew, and she is on her way to this interview. And this is when Dani and Henry first meet. And he is a pompous jackass, and you know, he just came across as just arrogant. And so he starts talking to her and asking her about, you know, her experience, and she doesn't have any experience as a nanny. She was a teacher of very young children, and, you know, she's now in London. She's been in London for 6 months, and he, you know, was looking at her resume and just trying to see if she's a good fit. And he started asking her, and then he asked her, what's the catch? And she said, I'm sorry, what now? She was like, well, what's the catch? She was like, someone your age or in your 30s, a position like this is usually, an older person would usually apply for this position. I'm just kind of, taken aback that someone your age, with, you could have all these other opportunities. Why would you want to take this job? And so she kind of came back at him. He was like, that's kind of odd. And so she said, and her face expression changed. She was like, it is kind of odd. It's odd that, you live in this great house and you have these wonderful children. And, you know what? The ad that I saw for, this position, I saw 6 months ago when I first moved to London. And she was like, so, I agree. The question is, what's the catch? So he kind of was like, he had this little touche look on his face, like, But so the next time you see her, she's in the bar and she's looking through the one ass because she just has in her mind, I'm just not going to get that position. So the next thing, he walks into the bar, he goes over, he sits down. So she decides she's going to walk over to him. And she was going to, they was going to have a drink. She was like, this was, that was the weirdest interview that I've ever had. And I think that we should toast to it. So, after a few drinks or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, they start talking. And she asked him, okay, so what's the catch? And he's like, huh? She was like, so no, really, what's the catch? And so then he, goes into the story of the kids and of course the parents dying and then the nanny, they had prior to the position she was interviewing for, had an untimely death on the property, and then he revealed that she committed suicide, or at this point that's how it looked, how the story's going to unfold, and so it was classified as a suicide. And stories travel, and now she died on the property, and so it has this whole. People are kind of leery about working in an environment like that. And so you can kind of see her facial expression when he said that she died, and she was like, oh, okay, she died. And then he asked her, so what's the catch? What's with you? Why are you here? And so she reveals that, she, as a teacher, she had like 25 students, and, you become attached to all of them and you want to help all of them. And she started to get kind of really emotional, and it's like, it's too many of them and it's not enough of you. And when I saw the ad for 2 children, just 2, she was like, if I'm going to make a difference, I can make a difference in these 2 children's lives. It's, but instead of the 25, it's like, there was just never enough time. There's never enough me. And there were just so many children with so many problems that I was not able to help them. And I just had to, it just got to be a bit much for me. And so next time you see her, she's walking into her hotel room. She's kind of tips, you can tell. And the one thing you see is the mirrors were covered. And so she comes in, she takes her shoes off. The next thing you know, she's on the phone. This is, like I said, 1987. So there's this payphone in the hallway, and she's talking to someone and saying that she got the job and that she's going to be staying a little longer. And while she's talking on the phone, they're like flashing between her having a conversation and her packing, because she then revealed that, she got the job, and that, once she gets settled, she'll send the number. And the person on the phone is telling her that they were telling her that she needed to come back and deal with it, and she's running away because she kept saying, no, I'm not running away, and I don't like it when you say that to me, and basically, again, once I get settled, I'll get you the number. And so she goes through, make sure she packs everything up, and then she went through and she pulled the covers off the mirrors. And as she was walking out of the room, she turned to look in the mirror, and there was this dark figure in the reflection with these glowing eyes. And you find out, okay, there's more to Dani than she's letting on. So what is she running away from? And what's the real reason why she's in London? And so she walks out, and she's now standing outside waiting to be picked up. So Owen picks her up. Owen is, I don't remember the character name, but he was the medical examiner. If you ever saw the series iZombie. So he, picks her up, and they're now en route to Bly Manor. Now, it doesn't give you a time frame of how long that drive is, but you see the scenery is beautiful. I mean, it's just lush green. It's just green as far as the eye can see. It's just a gorgeous view, right? And then you flash to her in the backseat of the car. She is passed the hell out with her mouth all hanging open, and eventually he hits some bump in the road or a whole pothole or something, and of course it shakes her awake. And she starts, asking like, well, how long have I been out? And he was like, oh, not too long. And then, of course, they started talking. And she finds out that Owen is the cook, because when she interviewed, he did tell her that there's a gardener, a cook and a gardener who they don't live on the property. And there's a live-in housekeeper. And so Owen is actually the cook, but he was telling her that, sometimes when Henry needs him to, run errands, he'll take on some extra responsibilities. And so as they're driving through, she's, telling him how beautiful things are. And he starts telling her, he grew up there. So, people don't typically see where they live the same way like a visitor would see it. And so he's like, I lived here all my life. I went to Paris. I wanted to be a chef. He ends up coming back because his mom got sick. And as they were approaching the house, she decided, you know what, can you stop here and I'll walk the rest of the way, because she wanted to walk the property and see, just to walk around and see what was on the property. And so as she's walking, she could hear singing, and she follows the sound, and that's when she saw the little girl sitting by the water, and the little girl stopped, and Dani was like, oh, I love the song was beautiful, or she said the singing, and the little girl was like, well, I wasn't singing. And so she's very excited. And now this is Flora. So the niece and nephew, the little girl was named Flora, the young man is named Miles, and their brother and sister. And so the first person she meets of the family is Flora by the lake. And so they start talking, and she's like, oh, I'm just so wonderful, so wonderful that you're here, and she's just so pleasant. This is Flora. And I'm like, okay, what's this? So it's like, okay, this young girl is way too nice. But she sat and talked with Dani for a while, and she had this little thing in her hand, and Dani asked her about that, and I forget exactly what she said, but Dani was, she's commented on how beautiful the lake was, and Flora started, she got really, serious, like, don't, it's not all that you think it is. They got vampire leeches and worms in there. Like, she's really trying to scare her off, and she wants, really trying to scare her away to stay away from that lake. And so she went to get something, and then as they were walking away, this is Flora and Dani, you saw the little totem, or this little voodoo doll type thing she has, she's stuck in the ground as they were walking away. So they're walking away, and they eventually meet up with Miles and Hannah Grose. And so he walks over, being the little gentleman, and, oh, it's wonderful to meet you. And he kissed her hand, and initially, Hannah was kind of deep in thought, or I don't know if she was trying to get a read on Dani or something was off, but she initially didn't, jump up to introduce herself. Eventually, she kind of, came to herself, got herself together, and introduced herself, and they eventually made their way to the house. And so, they're walking through the house, and Flora decided that she was going to be the little tour guide. And so Dani walks in, and you see this, grand staircase, and everything is perfectly splendid, right? That's Flora. Everything is just perfectly splendid. And so she walks into the kitchen. She shows her the kitchen. Owen is in there preparing their lunch. It could be lunch or dinner. I don't know. I don't really know what time of day it is at this point. There's still light out, but you know, it could still be later in the day. So he's preparing the food, and you can see the way she talks to Owen. Like she really likes Owen. This is Flora, and so they show her the kitchen, and then they show her the classroom. The only place that wasn't perfectly splendid was the classroom. She was, because Flora was like, yeah, this is quite boring. Okay. And so then there's this hallway that's really dark, that's off limits. And she was like, oh, it's perfectly splendid, but we're not allowed to go down there. That's where their parents used to stay. And it's kind of closed off now, so nobody goes down there. And they eventually take her to her room. And, you know, Flora is like, oh, you know, once you know, and now we can show you this, that, and the third. And Miss Grose is like, well, maybe we should let Dani, Miss Clayton get settled, and well, you know, we can catch up with her later. And so she kind of walks him out of the room, and Dani is now, you know, she's in the room, and she's, you know, feeling excited about this new opportunity, right? She's at this beautiful house on this beautiful property. The children at this point seem very sweet. Everybody seems really, really nice. And so just as she was about to take her clothes off, you see the door crack open, and then you can see Mr. Miles kind of peeking in. And luckily she saw him before she pulled her shirt all the way off, and she kind of turned and startled her, and she's like, well, what are you doing? He was like, oh, well, I came to give you a gift. And I want to tell you again how happy we are that you're here. And so he gave her this beautiful hair clip, and she thanked him and told him that, you know, the next time that he should knock. And so as he left out, and she said, well, you know, just, you know, she thanked him and told him next time you should knock, and kind of let him out of the room, and she closed the door. Okay, so she decided to try her hand at making tea, right? And that, you can already tell the way she made that tea, that well, nobody gonna like that tea, right? But, you know, she tried. Okay, so the first person you see is Miss Grose. She drinks the tea, and she's like, okay, okay, that's okay. I mean, obviously nobody wants to come out, well, you know, no adult is going to come out and say, okay, this is absolutely disgusting. How dare you put this toxic waste in a cup and serve it to me, honey? But, a child will always tell you the truth. I don't remember him saying anything, but his facial expression said it all, right? So, eventually, you know, they're sitting down, and, Flora and Owen come in with the food. And he's, you know, they talked for a little bit and started asking her about, you know, her past, and, you know, why she was there and the whole thing. And Owen just tells him that he has to go. And of course, Flora's disappointed. They're like, oh, you're not going to stay for dinner? He's like, well, no, I need to go and help my mom. And Flora starts asking him about his mom. And he was like, you know, she's doing quite well. And thank you for asking. Like, it seems like everybody seems to be very nice and pleasant at this point, right? And so it's like you're always, at this point, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, why? Okay, you know, they could just be genuinely nice, good people. Okay, so he left, and you know, they talked for a while, and then eventually Miss Grose grabbed her plate and she left. And Dani was like, "Oh, you're not going to eat?" She was like, "Oh, well, no, I'll just eat it later." And so as she walked out, as Miss Grose walked out, Dani looked over and she saw that she didn't even touch that tea. After that first sip, she was done. And so Dani felt, you can tell her by her facial expression, she was like, oh, okay. And so, so Miles agreed to help her. You know, you help her learn her how to make a good cup of tea, right? And so she was like, okay, thank you. So now, you know, it's bath time. Flora's in the tub, and she's just being a kid, you know, being her silly self. She got the soap all on her head, and you know, a couple of times it looked like she was staring off in the distance, and Dani kind of looked behind her, was trying to figure out, like, who is she looking at, somebody, or what's going on? Now, I don't know if Dani thought that if Dani was concerned that maybe she was seeing whatever that reflection was when she was leaving the hotel, but so they talked for a little bit. And then Dani turned, and when she turned, Flora saw the clip that Miles had given her. And she was like, well, where did you get that clip? And well, Miles gave it to me as a gift. And she was like, well, he shouldn't have done that. And she said, well, why? He said, because it's not yours. And so the next thing you know, you see Flora kind of staring off in the distance, and Dani turns to look, to see if somebody's actually standing there, and then she turns to look at Flora, and it looks like Flora's talking to somebody. She's not verbally communicating, but she's kind of like shaking her head like yes, and nodding her head like yes, like whoever she's talking to is in agreement. They've just agreed on something, right? And so she ends up telling her that, oh well, the clip is fine, you can keep the clip. Like, she was just talking to Rebecca, who was the previous nanny, and Rebecca was like, oh girl, no, you can go ahead and tell her she can keep that clip. Like, that was basically how she was like, oh no, it's fine, you can keep it, it's fine. So she get her Flora out of the tub. Flora goes into her room so she can get her, because she's old enough to dress herself. And as Dani was walking out of the bathroom, she saw a reflection in the mirror. She saw that entity again. So she walks into Miles' room. Now, Miles and Flora's bedrooms are connected they have the bathroom in between, and so they can each access the bathroom from their rooms. So she's able to walk straight through from one room to the next, walking through the bathroom. So she walks into Miles' room, and she starts talking to Miles a little bit, and starts telling him about how she went to different schools, and and how his uncle had told him that he came back earlier, that he's been having some trouble, and if he wants to talk to her about anything, that he can talk to her about anything. And he just wasn't ready to talk about anything, so he just said good night, told her good night, and that was that. And so she walked across, and at this point Flora's dressed, and she's playing with her dollhouse. This is a huge dollhouse that's built. It's like a small Bly Manor, basically. So it's open, and she has all these little creepy looking dolls and stuff in there that she's playing with, and she has this doll that kind of resembles Dani. And so they talked a little bit, and Dani was like, well, you have a lot of dolls, and you have to learn to pick up. And so it was this one little creepy doll that she picked up, and Dani and Flora kind of got a little scared. I don't know if she was scared or upset. She was like, well, you never move that doll. She stays where she is. And this doll was like kind of halfway under the dresser. And so you can tell by Flora's face that she wasn't joking. So Dani ends up to placate her. She ends up putting the doll back under the dresser. And so she gets Flora in bed, and they start talking, and Flora was really telling Dani, like, I want you to do me a favor. And she said, and Dani was like, okay. She said, I want you to stay in your room at night and not wander around. And she was really saying it out of concern for Dani. So I'm like, what is going on this property, right? So it's making you, because she basically tell her, please just stay in your room, stay in your bed. Basically, you'll be safe there. And Dani eventually, tells her that, I can't promise to do that. And she was, basically begged her, just try to stay in your room. And she said, well, I promise I'll do it tonight. And so she tucks her in. And so the next thing you see Dani sitting up in her bed, because she's not tired. This is, she's on this estate, and, she want to be able to go out and explore. And she's made this promise to Flora that she wasn't going to wander around. But of course, eventually, curiosity got the best of her, so she ends up going out, and she goes down to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea. And of course, while she's waiting for the kettle to whistle there, she hears a noise. Of course, she goes to explore this noise. And of course, it's pitch black in this house damn near, and she's kind of staring really intensely into this room. Like, I guess she's trying to see. And it's like you can almost see something that's kind of blurred standing behind her, or something behind her, but you can't really. I'm like, okay, what is that something? Or is that like a statue or something? And so the kettle goes off. She goes in there, makes herself a cup of tea, gets herself a biscuit or a cookie, and she goes back to her room. And so this thing that I thought that you initially think is like a statue, it shifts, it kind of turns, and now it's kind of watching her as she's walking down the hall back to her room. And so the next day, she's up, she got the kids up and dressed, and they're just out, just walking, getting some exercise, right? And Miles kind of run off, And Flora tells her, I'm really cross with you. And so Dani's like, well, why? She said, I told you, you promised me that you wouldn't leave your room, and you did. And, every once in a while, Miles will chime in like, Dani, come and look at this, And they're talking. And Dani and Flora still talking. She said, well, why are you so upset? And then she mentioned something about the lady in the lake. And so Miles eventually comes over, and she was like, look. And so he had this spider in his hand. So of course Flora screamed and ran away. And Dani was telling him, she took the spider and she allowed the spider to kind of crawl across her hand a little bit. And she talked to him and said, I had a lot of students, young students who pretty much tried every trick in the book to scare me. And then they realized that I don't scare easily. And he said, I already knew that. I didn't do that to scare you. I know you don't, that you don't scare easily. So I'm assuming he did that to scare Flora. And so, they started talking, and she said that, your uncle, she tried to, she's trying to talk to him again, like, your uncle told me that, you were having trouble in school. And she was like, you talked to my uncle, you saw him? And she said, of course I did. He interviewed me for the position. And so he was like, well, did he ask about us? And it was like the saddest look you would ever think of. Like they're starved for their uncle's attention. And at this point, we have not seen him again since, the interview. And so, she, tries to reassure him that, he's thinking about you guys and he loves you guys a lot. And, he's just busy. And, of course, eventually, when he has time, he will come home and he will call you and, just try to, that man, that's not important to him. But, so the next scene is them running. They're going back to the house. The two kids are running up to the house. And you see, Dani stop, and she's looking like she could see someone, and they flash. And there's this man standing on, I'm going to say a terrace, a balcony or something, but they used a different word. And she waved, and he just stood there. He was too far away for her to really see his face. But didn't want to see his face, but obviously she could see that the guy, it was someone actually standing there. And she waved and he didn't, and she heard some noise that distracted her. And of course, by the time she turned to see where the noise was coming from and turned back around, he was gone. So she eventually makes it into the house. The kids have already sat down for breakfast, I'm assuming at this point. And this is when the gardener walks in. It's a woman. I can't think of her name right now. She was kind of nasty. She walked in and walked over, washed her hands, and kind of sat down. She never introduced herself to Dani, and they started talking. And eventually, Dani asked about, she asked if there was somebody else on the property, and they was like, "Well, no." And when she told them where she saw the individual standing, they was like, "Oh, that's going to be in the area that's closed off, and the only way to access that area would be to walk through the house." And of course, nobody's, of course, no stranger has been here. No strangers wandered through this house and just happened to end up out there. And so, maybe you're just seeing things. This is what Miss Grose tells her, Hannah Grose. And so, of course, she wasn't. So they sit down, they finish talking, and Miss Grose grabs a cup of tea, and Dani notices that once again she's not eating, and so she says, "You're not eating?" And she was like, "Oh, I ate later. I just came I'm just here for the company." And so after that, Dani, she went down the hall, the closed off portion, and she wanted to go to that terrace to see, how it would be accessed, and to see if she see any remnants of whoever this person was that was standing out there. And as she's standing on the terrace, she could see that there's a little chapel on the property. And then she turns to look down, and she see another one of those dolls that she saw Flora with when she first met her. And then she looked back over to the chapel, and she noticed that a light was on. And so she walks over to the chapel, and she could see Miss Grose. She's sitting there by the window, and she's deep in thought. And so Dani walks over and she starts talking to Miss Grose. And Miss Grose eventually tells her the story about, the kids and how sweet the kids are. And you know, they've had so much loss in their short lives, you know, their parents dying, and then the nanny, and she was talking about how the kids would be so noisy and how it used to drive her crazy. And then of course after, you know, their parents died, and and then you know, the nanny died, and you know, they kind of shut down, you know, from all the loss and the hurt and the pain. And she said, and now, you know, the noise that they make is like music to her ears, because she see that they're happy again. But then she starts telling her about it, you know, what happened with the nanny, the previous nanny, and how Flora was the one that found her in the lake. And you know, it was just trauma after trauma after trauma. And so Dani asked her about the little voodoo doll. She was like, oh, it's a talisman that Flora kind of leaves around, and I think, you know, she feels like it's protecting us in some way. And so, you know, they talked for a little while. It was kind of an emotional moment when she, you know, was telling her about the parents and, you know, the kids and the nanny. And, you know, and so now she and Miss Grose eventually leaves. And so Dani makes her way back to the house. At this point, it's nighttime. The kids are all ready for bed. She walks into the room, into Miles' room first, and he's standing by the window. And he was like in a different mood that night. Like, he wasn't his normal, you know, like, he wasn't his gentleman self. He was very Children of the Corn-esque. Okay. Like, okay, she was telling him it was time for bed, and he was like, oh, is it? And so he's just staring off out the window, and she was like, yes, you know, I just, you know, it's not time for games. And he was like, oh, you know, there's always time for games, or made some comment, right? And he was saying, like, you don't like games? And she was like, well, not at bedtime. And he said, oh, you know, quite to the contrary, I think that bedtime is a perfect time for games. He made some comment. And then you can hear Flora saying, stop being weird, Miles. He said, oh, he's always so weird, right? So as Dani walks out to go into Flora's room, you can see Miles get in bed. And so Dani walks over, and she still has the little talisman in her hand, and they talk a little bit. And she said, you know, she starts telling her how she loves her creativity. This is Dani talking to Flora, how she loves her creativity and how she's using her creativity to protect, you know, to protect everyone in the house. But she did tell her that, you know, but I do want you to use your creativity while you're protecting everyone else. I want you to protect yourself, and I don't want you to go back out on that terrace. And so she agreed not to. So she tucks her in. And as she was leaving, that creepy doll that was under the dresser, that she wanted her to put back under the dresser, is now sitting up in the floor. And of course, Dani didn't see it, and she kicked the doll. And then of course, she bent down to pick up the doll, and she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And she's talking, and she looks over, and Flora is sitting straight up in the bed, looking scared, looking angry. I don't know. And so Dani eventually says, well, where would you like me to put where would you like the doll tonight? Would you like it back under the dresser, or would you like me to put it in the house, the doll house? And so Miles walks in. He starts asking her if she can go into Flora's closet so she can get this fan that he needs, and you know, he needs it to sleep. And then Flora was like, oh yeah, the fan, it's in the closet. It's like, what are they planning? And so she was like, okay, well, so she walks over to Flora, and she placed the doll on the sheet in front of Flora. And Flora, you could tell, looked scared. She looked terrified. She's like, oh God, like, I don't really want this thing this close to me. But then she turns around and she walks into Flora's closet to look for this fan. She's down further into the closet. She's like, I don't see this fan. And they're saying, she turns around, and now Flora and Miles are standing there again, looking Children of the Corn-esque, just staring at her. Oh, it might be under the clothes. And so she turns around, looks for it, and then you know, they close the closet door and locks it. And so she goes over, she's banging on the door, telling them to let her out, open this door. It's not time for game. And they're like, well, oh, we're trying to, and you know, we can't find the key. And of course the key was in the lock, because it had to be in the lock, because they had to lock the door. And you can tell she starts having a panic attack. I don't know if she's claustrophobic or something. And the next thing you know, she is pretty much on the floor. Like, she kind of tore the closet up a little bit, and the next thing you know, they open the door, and she flies out, and they're like, we're sorry. I don't know. I think that they were protecting her from something, because they got real scared when she kicked that doll. And I guess they didn't know what was going to happen next. So I think them locking her in the closet, when I think about it, you know, was probably was their way of protecting her in some way. But of course, she doesn't see that. She just sees them as being disobedient and just they've done something wrong. Especially since, you know, it really did seem like she was having a panic attack in there. And so she basically told them to go to bed. She walks out of the room into the hallway, and she saw footprints leading to the kids' room. And so she was like, she's thinking they locked her in the closet so they can go outside. And so she's following these footprints outside. The front door is wide open. And she follows the footprints all the way outside. And she's kind of looking around the property. And then she turns around. You see her turn around and she's looking up at something. And then the camera turns. And she's looking up at their bedroom windows. And they're both standing there in their respective rooms looking at her from their windows. And that's how this episode ends. So it's like, oh, okay, what is it with this doll? These talismans? What's going on? What's going on with Dani and whatever this entity is that's followed her to London? What's really going on here? But again, that's how this episode ended. I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.